Welcome to Daily Dose of Aramaic Grammar Lessons. This is Lesson 8, Independent Pronouns, and you can find more information on this topic in Biblical Aramaic for Biblical Interpreters, pages 52 to 59. Let's place the independent pronouns in a table. There are some items on this table that will catch our eyes, so let's just first look at the one that's most obvious, probably the grayed out cell for second feminine singular. This word does not actually appear in Biblical Aramaic, but it does appear outside the Bible in texts of the time, and that's a reconstructed set of vocalizations, the vowels there. However, the second feminine plural independent pronoun, so the plural you for feminine reference, has not been found anywhere in the discovered corpus of Aramaic of the time. So that's why there's a double dash in that cell of this table. And then another thing to explain is the difference between the light cell boundary and the bold. So the bold ones are setting off words that are different between Aramaic and Hebrew. However, in the upper right, we see third masculine singular he, third feminine singular she. These words are exactly the same in Biblical Hebrew. Now, I'd just like to highlight there are two versions of the second masculine singular you. The first one is the kare form. The second one is the kativ form. So it's sort of really the same word. It's just that's the difference in manuscripts. And then in the upper left, the they words are free variants. Now, let's talk about how independent pronouns are used. And their use, from a syntactical sense, is important to focus on, and the use differs as far as word order goes between nominal and verbal clauses. There's a typical case, or we could say an unmarked case, where there's not a particular topic or focus, emphasis on a particular component within the clause. There's an order of constituents that's typical. There's also an atypical order of constituents that conveys topic or focus, and we have to break it down between nominal and verbal clauses. So the first thing we can say is sort of the simple case, where in verbal clauses, independent pronouns are not necessary. That is to say, subject information, we know, is already encoded in finite verb forms. So this is a copy of the letter that they sent to him. Both the English word they and sent, those two ideas are actually united in the one Aramaic word, shalahu, there. So this is to be expected for a language like Biblical Aramaic, where the subject information is encoded in person, gender, number in the verb. Therefore, it's not necessary to repeat. Now, that repetition effect can happen in the atypical situation of placing an independent pronoun before the verb. So the sort of constituent order is subject, predicate. So here's an example of that. In Daniel 4:6, I, so that's in blue, I know that the Spirit of the holy gods is in you. Now, the way that I just read that might make it sound like no, I know, where no is the part that is supposed to jump out. But actually, this is Nebuchadnezzar speaking, and he's saying, I know. So the emphasis here, the focus, focal point, how about that, is really the first person common and singular independent pronoun that is standing before the verb. So that's the atypical situation. Why is this atypical? Well, it's not necessary to have the first common singular information conveyed in an independent pronoun. That's already in the verb, which I highlight in yellow. So by placing that independent pronoun first, there indeed is a heightening of the syntactic prominence of that constituent of the verbal clause. And, you know, we've been talking about verbal clauses so far. What about situations, verbless clauses? What about situations where there's no verb, okay, in nominal clauses? Well, in this case, interestingly, subject predicate is the typical or unmarked word order for nominal clauses as regards independent pronouns. And this is what I mean. For he is the living God. So the he being placed in the second position here after the D. So he, God, living, or the living. So he, the God, the living. is the order? Well, to place the who word, the he, before the predicate, which is the living God, that is normal. That's unmarked. There's not really a focus upon the idea of he is the living God and not some other God. Okay? Not some other God is not the living God. That's what I mean. But there's the opposite case, predicate subject. So look at this in Daniel 4:21. It is a decree of the Most High. So in this case, it's she, third person feminine singular, because you see that the decree word, which is the first, is feminine singular in its construct with the at ending right there. So it makes sense to have the third person feminine singular independent pronoun to be the it word here to match in gender and number. So a decree of the Most High is it. So it's underscoring, hey, this decree, that decree isn't a decree of the Most High. Okay, so what we've seen so far is sort of according to expectation from our Hebrew knowledge, as is this. So in Ezra 4:10, and the rest of the nations that the great and noble Osnappar deported and settled, they, in the village of Samaria and the rest of beyond the river. So there's this big list that has gone from the previous verse into this one of all the people incorporated under this rubric, they. So the they in Ezra 4:10 is serving in this resumptive way of just gathering all that information in one word before moving on as to who all those people included in the they are and what they're doing. Okay? Now, I've mentioned Hebrew, our pre-existing Hebrew knowledge helping us understand independent pronouns. Well, it's safe in biblical Hebrew, in most cases, to call the independent pronouns subject pronouns. Because if they're appearing in those verbless or verbal, nominal, or verbal clauses like the ones we've seen here in our Aramaic examples, they're serving as the subject. However, in biblical Aramaic, this is not really the case. So it's better to call these pronouns independent pronouns rather than subject pronouns, if that was our habit for Hebrew. And I'm going to show why. That is because a unique facet of Aramaic as compared to Hebrew is the use of independent pronouns as object pronouns. That's against expectation. And it's third person plural, and it happens to be third person masculine plural here in Ezra 5:12. He gave, that's the first word, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. What did he give? He gave them. So it's very clear that this them idea is serving as the object of the verbal idea, and it's represented by an independent pronoun. So unlike Hebrew, completely unlike Hebrew, independent pronouns, and in this case it's third person plural, independent pronouns can serve as objects. And this is the case with extra biblical Aramaic too. So this is not unique to biblical Aramaic. It's just a characteristic of the language in general that the independent pronoun has this object use for third person plural. Now, next topic is some carryover knowledge from biblical Hebrew, the use of independent pronouns as demonstratives. Here's Daniel 2:32. This image, its head was of fine gold. So he, the image, is how it reads at the beginning. Its head was of fine gold. So this idea of being able to represent a demonstrative exists in biblical Hebrew as well. And here is a plural example. And in the days of those kings. So I put in parentheses there because you can see the suffix on the first word representing the suffix pronoun there. So in the days of those kings. So otherwise it'd be the kings they. Well, who are they? Well, it's really in context those kings in this case. So both singular and plural, the independent pronoun can serve as a demonstrative in context. Now here's a use that you might not have considered that much, but it's used this way, the independent pronouns used this way several times in biblical Aramaic. So Daniel 2:38 shows you are the head of gold. So if we tried to line up a word for what's in blue there, we would say, you, he, the head of gold. So you are he, something like that. But instead of trying to be literalistically lining up a word in English to the word in Aramaic, what it looks like is going on here is that the third person masculine singular independent pronoun is acting as a copula, which in this case, to put it simply, means the to be verb. So you are what? You're the head of gold, and the are, the to be idea, that's supplied with the independent pronoun. There are several uses of the independent pronoun as a copula where it's next to another independent pronoun. So you notice the you right there. So this is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. You are the head of gold. Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion of the use of independent pronouns. Obviously, to be able to do some fluent reading of the biblical Aramaic texts, that's going to take some memorization of that table and the recognition of the various variants as the right person, gender, number combination for a given passage, as well as taking into account the various uses of the independent pronouns. So hopefully Lesson 8 was helpful in schematizing those for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.